What's going on, everybody? So the Cowboys just slapped the non-exclusive franchise tag on George Pickens. In this video, we'll check out what that means for him, the Cowboys, and negotiations moving forward. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump right in. So as expected, the Cowboys do franchise tag George Pickens. However, this is the non-exclusive tag. I think a lot of us were expecting the exclusive franchise tag, which means basically sign the tag and get a deal done by July 15th. Otherwise, you got to play on the tag, George Pickens. And it's a little bit different now with the non-exclusive franchise tag. And I think this is actually a great opportunity for both the player and the team on this tag. So to start off, just stating the differences between the non-exclusive and exclusive franchise tag. So basically, the exclusive tag just means that you belong to us. You've got no rights, basically. You can't talk to any other teams. You sign this tender or this tag, I should say. You sign the tag, you play on this tag. It's $28 million in your pocket this year. That's for this season. Obviously, that changes as the average salary goes up. But this year, at the wide receiver spot, that's $28 million. And this is what it is for a year. The non-exclusive tag is a bit different. It allows the player to go out or the agent to go out and talk to other teams and to negotiate with other teams, figure out the actual market value for that player, and then go from there. Now, what's really neat for the Cowboys in this scenario is if another team comes in and tries to swoop and steal George Pickens away because maybe they negotiated a $39 million deal for George Pickens. I don't think the Cowboys would go that high, and I don't think Pickens' value is that high anyways, but if that did happen, well, that team also has to give up 2 first-round picks to the Cowboys to steal George Pickens, okay? And that's assuming the Cowboys don't match that offer. Now, those picks would come in the next available draft, so if a team did this thing, made this thing work in like March 2nd or something like that, March 3rd, well, then you're getting their first-round pick in 2026, and you would get the pick in the consecutive draft in 2027. So you would get those 2 first-round picks. Again, probably not going to happen. That would be a huge ask. But now what you can do is, because you've issued the tag and he basically belongs to you, his rights belong to you, you can continue to negotiate trades with other teams. So maybe you don't get 2 firsts for him, but maybe you get a first and a third or a first and a fourth or something like that for George Pickens. And I saw reports that teams weren't really interested in giving up more than like a 3rd round pick for him, but I don't really understand that logic, because if you're talking about a guy who's going to make 32 to 35 million a year, somewhere around that mark, most likely, how does that equate to only a 3rd round value in a trade? It didn't make sense to me, but that's what some outlets were saying. Whatever, they can have their thoughts, I'll have mine. But you can continue to negotiate trades with these teams and negotiate with George Pickens and his agent at the same time to maybe keep him here in Dallas long term. And by allowing his agent to kind of put his feelers out and get a gauge on the market, maybe that helps to get this deal done even sooner than if you had issued the exclusive rights tag, because now the feelers are out and you can really gauge the marketplace and the interest of other teams while negotiating with the Cowboys, from the agent's perspective. Now, this is all fine and great, but preferably what we need to see from the Cowboys is to figure out what they're going to do with George Pickens before March 10th at midnight. That is when the legal tampering window opens up, okay? And why I say that is the Cowboys have a ton of needs, right? And we all want them to be big players in free agency, just like every year we want that, and they don't really do that, but we all feel like this year might be different because A, they have so many needs, B, they've been moving differently, and C, Jerry's getting older, right? And hopefully that means something as far as how quickly they want to improve this team and turn around. And if you have a $28 million cap charge sitting on your projected books as they deal with this tag, that's going to prohibit them or restrict them from being as aggressive as they could be in free agency front, right? Or if you happen to trade the man, well, we don't really want that to happen. But if you get acceptable capital in return for the draft, or maybe players or whatever the heck it might be, it could be anything, right? But as long as it's acceptable, I think, we'd be okay with that, maybe. But we have to at least try to get that done, or to get to that point and have a firm handle or a finish on what we're doing with George Pickens by the time legal tampering is available. Because I'm telling you guys right now, if George Pickens hits the cap for $28 million or sits on the books as a projected $28 million cap charge, the Cowboys will not be as aggressive in free agency as we all hoped and expected that they would be. It's been the same thing for I don't even know, 4 or 5 years. They seem to have these big contracts with Dak and Micah and CeeDee and all these guys that in their minds prohibit them from being active in free agency, or at least the first 2 waves in free agency, because they have these huge numbers looming overhead in their minds. And without the firm details on the books, they don't want to make moves. They just don't want to do it. And so it would be nice to go into a free agency where they know exactly what their financials are going to look like. Hard, firm numbers, not projections. And preferably, let's get that $28 million off the books and get a much lower number, if any number at all, for George Pickens. Now, what is Pickens' actual value worth? And I'm just some random guy on the internet, right? I do crunch a lot of numbers, try to get to the bottom of what these valuations are actually at. And here's what I come up with, right? So the current market for the NFL's top receivers is somewhere between 35 to 40 million dollars, right? And I looked at the Bengals because they have a really wide receiver 1A, 1B situation, or a really, really high-end receiver 2 with T. Higgins. And it's not comparable as far as their stats go, but I think what they do for their teams as the second guy behind a stud, Jamar Chase in Cincinnati or CeeDee Lamb in Dallas, you can kind of compare the teams that way. And from the Cowboys' perspective, right, they're probably looking at T. Higgins' contract, and they're going to add the 20% cap modifier, or really it's 10% because he signed last year. So the 10% inflation modifier on top of T. Higgins' deal. And because I think Pickens is a more versatile, you could say better maybe than T. Higgins. T. Higgins' thing is injuries. He gets hurt a lot, so that's why you can't really compare the stats. But let's say George Pickens is a better player than T. Higgins. So you're going to add a certain percentage on top of that. And so what I came up with, George Pickens, when you look at that deal, and then some of the other deals around the league as well, like a DK Metcalf, AJ Brown, other guys who are actual real number 1 receivers, and you compare them to those guys, the number that you can come up with is around $34 million. So my official prediction is going to be George Pickens signs eventually. If he signs this year, it's going to go up next year if you don't sign him this year. But this year, his contract value would be something like 4 years, $132 million. That'd be a $33 million AAV. All right, and before we break down a similar contract structure, what that contract could possibly look like, I just wanted to say thank you guys for watching. If you've gotten this far in the video, please hit that subscribe button. The likes, the comments, all that stuff helps my small channel get into the flow of YouTube. You can also check me out on Twitter at Lord_Dilly. We do Twitter Spaces where we all hang out as a big group every Thursday night at 8 p.m. Eastern. You can look me up on Twitter. You can also look up my community, Cowboys Storyliners. Check us out there. All right, and let's get back to the conversation. And so just looking at an example contract here. So DK Metcalf signed this exact deal last year. 4 years, $132 million, $33 million AAV. What's important here, though, guys, is the guarantees. And you always look at the guarantees. That's the most important part of the contract. It gives you an idea of what you're actually really paying the player, what you're really signing up for, and when you can get out from that deal. And so just an example of what you're looking at here, you know, the Cowboys could structure it like this. What the Cowboys typically do is they'll spread the cap out over the course of the contract, but then they'll do some restructures, right? Especially for guys that they're comfortable with, that they think might get another deal here in Dallas. They can extend and push that money out even further. So, you know, the Cowboys could do it this way where it's pretty even, 10%, 10%, 11%, or you might see something more backloaded where it's less up front and more in the end. You could see, like I said, a restructure where that pushes more towards the end. You know, in year 2, they restructure that deal. And there's a million ways to do it, but this is just one example of what that contract could potentially look like. So that's the big news of the day coming out of Dallas. You know, we still got Brandon Aubrey to think about. We got the, you know, second round tender potentially for him coming down the pipeline. We just used a second round tender on TJ Bass. We've also got Hoffman to consider. I don't know what that means since they just used that tender on Bass. They can still use it on Hoffman, but are they going to keep doing that, right? They're probably going to use it on Brandon Aubrey, if I had to guess. So you're really going to have 3 guys on that second round. I don't know what the plan is with that, but we'll see. So keep your eyes open, keep your ears open, and we'll see what the Cowboys do here. Hopefully by the end of the first week in March, we have some better details around some of these events, especially George Pickens. Like I said, got to get that done and figured out, hopefully before the legal tampering period in March 10th, so we can actually go into free agency with nothing hanging over our heads and participate in Wave 1 and Wave 2. So let me know what y'all think. You think George Pickens is going to be a Cowboy here long term? You think he's going to get traded? Or what do you think is going to happen with him and his deal? Let me know what your thoughts are below. Appreciate you as always. I'll catch you later.